And we're live.
Hey, I feel like we should introduce a drum roll and a cymbal crash. The trouble is you can't time it with Facebook. You never quite know when it's gone live.
Your orchestra background is coming out
Yeah,
here. You're going to
absolutely.
orchestrate the music for our.
Yeah, it's more of a music theatre kind of instinct. It's like, if somebody walks across the room, I used to accompany them on the piano just because I get bored. I'm like, no, we need some underlay here. Anyway, man, we're talking very serious business topics today, and here we are stopping the comic mode, but we're talking about
Yeah.
ladder traps, which is, I think, a very cool concept. When you sent me the outline for this, as we do, and we tend to take it in turns or swap around, I'm like, this is really cool. This is something that needs discussion. So I'm looking forward to this. And we're not going to reveal what ladder traps are, I guess. And so you have to stay listening to find out what that is.
Well, exactly right. So it's going to be a great conversation. If you're joining us live, hello, hello. Welcome to the live broadcast recording of the E-commerce Leader podcast. We, as our tradition, record these on Sunday mornings, and then we take off the MP3 file and put it everywhere podcasts are done. So you get the benefit of hearing us live do this conversation, and it's going to be a great time. So ladder traps. What are ladder traps? Well, we're going to explain it. Hopefully it's a little bit of a mystery hook phrase. I don't know if it will ever rise to the occasion of being an economics principle or whatever, how such things get established. I'm not sure, but this is a big, important topic for business owners. And so it'll be a good time, I think, diving into it. So if you're listening to us live, feel free to leave a comment underneath wherever you're listening. Say hello. Tell us where you're listening from. Ask any questions you'd like us to address in the show, and we'll go from there. So, Michael, you ready to?
I'm ready to do this. Yeah,
Do
I'm
this
just
thing?
gonna pop a comment that says, "Please feel free to make a comment." But apart from that, that profound action, I'm ready to roll on this topic. I'm really looking forward to this. It's a really cool topic, in my opinion.
All right, let's do it. I'll kick us off here. Here we go. Some e-commerce business decisions have a big price to pay, and worse, they're not easily changed after you make them. One of the worst of these is called the ladder trap. And in this episode, we're going to discuss the concept, explain what it means, how to avoid the nasty, pernicious effects of stepping into the ladder trap, and how to really untangle it if you've made such mistakes. So, Michael, are you ready to jump into this fun topic today?
I am. I like the mystery. So obviously, I've got the benefit of having a talk to you about it. But tell us what the ladder trap is. What is this mysterious thing?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we've all heard the phrase before you climb a ladder, make sure it's leaning against the right wall, that kind of idea, or something along those lines. Usually that's related to career, climbing the ladder, or something like that. But in business operations and e commerce in particular, we can play with that metaphor and extend it even further. And so I want to do that. I want to take that metaphor and kind of unpack it and apply it specifically to e commerce in a few specific areas. And so let me just flesh it out for a moment, and then Michael, I love your commentary on this as well. So just imagine that you climb a ladder, and on each rung of that ladder, you have a positive outcome that increases with every step you go up, therefore making it harder to climb down or abandon that ladder or to reposition it somewhere else. The logical move in that case is to keep climbing the ladder. The problem with that is frequently we can get in these situations where we're 4, 5, 6 steps up a ladder and we realize we don't like this. We're stuck, we're trapped. This is not where we want to be in our business. Now that's on the positive reinforcement side, like we're getting sort of this positive benefit. And it's trapping us. The other angle on this is sometimes with ladder traps, you make a serious commitment or decision, and it has massive economic consequence to you, and you're stuck into it. And it's like the first rung on the ladder is a bear trap, and it springs closed on your foot, and you're on that ladder, and you're not getting off easily. And so these are the ideas that we can play with as it relates to our e-commerce business and understanding how to deal with these big decisions and how to make sure that we don't get stuck in them unwisely. Yeah.
Definitely an important point. And I think this is the sort of thing, if you've been in business for a few years, you're really going to resonate with this. I think it's certainly as
Mm-hmm.
soon as you said it, I'm like, oh, wow, yes,
Mm-hmm.
this is actually really, really important in my own businesses. I've seen it in my clients' businesses. I remember you said something like, be careful what rut you pick because you're going to be in it a long time. And I guess it relates to the habit 2 of the 7 habits of highly effective people by Stephen Covey. really solid book in terms of leadership principles, I think. And he says,
Mm-hmm.
begin with the end in mind. And he says the difference between leadership and management, to use this metaphor, is management's how to move up the ladder, but leadership's making sure you positioned it against the right tree in the first place. So that's why the word leader, which is part of our podcast title, because we're both passionate about it, it really is, I think, more important than you think it is on the day to day, because it's so easy to think, oh, I just need to buy, get more product lines, whether that's buying more as a reseller or developing more as a private label seller, develop more sales channels, and that's it. But actually, that is really not necessarily true, because as you say, if you're on the wrong ladder, then the further you go, the more vigorously you go, the worse you make the situation, and that's actually pretty frighteningly common, I think.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't remembered that Seven Habits of Highly Effective People tie-in, but that is actually a great connection point. And so it's fun to kind of link this, I guess, to Stephen Covey's work. So that's interesting. Yeah. No, totally
So
agree. It's a big deal. Yeah.
it is, and so how does it specifically show up in e-commerce businesses in your experience?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a decision-making model that we want to apply to the many choices inside of our business. But I would just say there's probably a priority list of decisions or big choices that you make as a founder, and they're kind of the short list of big ladder traps. And the first, and I'll just mention a few here, and Michael, I'm sure you have some more as well. But the first one I would say is your founding team or your any co-founder arrangement. If you start a business with a partner, you've made a massive decision, and that decision is a big, initial ladder that you're climbing up. You're going in one direction with that decision, and it becomes increasingly difficult to climb down that ladder and reposition. So that's one. The second one I would say is the niche or industry that you choose. And choosing a niche or industry, if you're a veteran in that industry and then you launch a business into it, you go into it with the full knowledge of who the people are, what they're like, the pros and cons of the customers and the industry. But if you launch a business in an industry that you don't have any background or familiarity with, you're really blind going into it with no idea whether the customers are cool people to you or not cool people to you, whether they're ethical to you or not ethical to you, whether uh, collaborators in your space are going to be cool to work with or not, whether your competitors are going to be ethical and compete kind of with kind of, I guess, can you say gentlemen's or gentle people's ethics, or are they going to be totally deceptive and evil? And so these are big choices related to your niche or industry. Another big ladder trap would be the product line you launch a product line and have it fail, and you don't have a ladder trap. But launch a product line and sell 6 or 7 figures of that product, and you were stuck into that product. So, that's the challenge with products. It's not if they fail, that's not hard. That's not a big deal. But if they are successful, then you're in a trap. Also financial choices, financing choices, taking out any big loan can be a ladder trap. Or really any long-term contract that you sign that has financial legal consequence to you, you could say is a ladder trap you need to think through. What are your thoughts on it? You have others to add to the list there?
Lots, yeah. I've
Mhm.
fallen into a number of ladder traps myself, and had clients that I see, quite often. So this is actually, yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot to discuss here. I really think this is of huge value. It sounds very negative, but seeing bad things coming and then choosing not to go down a path means that what is left is more likely to be a good path. And I just think it's worth being very mindful about this stuff. I would say a couple of thoughts. First, for your founding team or co-founder arrangement, business partnerships can be a huge trap. I mean, two basic traps that I've seen a lot. The first phrase I've heard from a business coach, I can't remember who it is. He said, you can't have a good partnership with a bad partner, and don't assume the other partner's the bad partner. I've been guilty of that. I've been the less committed partner in an e-commerce partnership in the past, and
Yeah.
that's not a fun thing to admit. But I probably should have said, I'm not going to do this because I haven't got the time and bandwidth to do it properly. And
Mhm.
looking back, I was embarrassed. My business partner was a smart, hardworking guy. We were also undercapitalized. So there are various other things, but looking back, it would have been a better decision to not work in that particular way. The other trap is that I've done myself to a degree, and that I see a lot, is that people work in a sort of pod, so they duplicate results, which is bad, or even worse, you micromanage each decision. And you see that in dysfunctional marriages to some degree. And we all have that with modern marriages. We don't
Mhm.
have these clean divisions that you used to have, and you end
Yeah.
up discussing a lot of things. But if you do that in a business partnership, you crawl forward compared to a competition. I really think that's a very easy trap to fall into, particularly if your only model of a two-person operation is a
Mhm.
marriage, because that's not a good plan to replicate that
Yeah.
inefficient way of working.
What do
You know.
you mean by work in a pod? Explain that phrase to
Yeah, what
people,
I mean
please.
is you kind of move around together. So you both work on product development for a bit, and then you both interfere with, the design, and then you both go and fuss about, you get samples each, and you both
Yeah.
discuss it to the nth degree, and then you
Yeah.
both work on
Okay.
marketing. And that's just, I'm not saying you shouldn't both be involved to a degree, but one person needs to be in charge of a particular area. And I
Yeah.
think the
Okay.
simple divisions that I've seen that work well, two very simple models to put forward to people to consider and discuss with a business partner if it's new. Number one is CEO and COO. You can both be equal owners of the business, but one is in charge of the overall business and one is in charge of operations. Another one that works very well is somebody's more product and product development and sourcing focused, and the other one is more marketing focused. That can also work, I think, very well. But as long as one person is in charge of a particular area, doesn't mean the other person never gets involved, but they don't make the final decision.
Yeah.
You move forwards. In my experience, if
Yeah.
you don't, you go
Well,
around in circles a lot.
that's a whole podcast in and of itself.
Yeah, it
Working
is
in
really.
pods. How, yeah, the working in pods trap. I never heard of that before, but that's so
Yeah,
true. Okay, what
yeah.
else is on your list of mistakes, ladder trap mistakes? Yeah.
Just a couple. I mean, just to reference what you were saying about, if something's succeeding and you've got 6 product lines there, then you're gonna be trapped. I think sometimes a sort of mediocre, just about surviving business can be the worst trap, because it's not bad enough that it fails completely and it forces you to stop doing that and do something different, but it's not really working. And I think that's one thing, you need to force things one way or the other. The other possible traps that I've seen are the business model you're operating, particularly a sourcing model. If you start importing stuff from China and you're private labeling, the timescales in which you tie up your money for are really big. So that means it takes you a long time to move the oil tank around if you decide to pivot. Um, the second one is physical and digital products. Obviously, you have a lot of experience of primarily digital product business. Physical products can, if you're not careful about it, have characteristics that sort of trap you more easily, I think, because the money's tied up for longer. The other one is products versus services, and that's an interesting one that
Yeah.
you can probably speak to more than me, because you guys have service side with the memberships,
Yeah.
and you have your digital products that are delivered without you physically being present. And if you get that wrong, services are not very easy to scale, and that can be a real trap for a lot of people. And
Yeah.
the fourth one, and the final thing, is something I've got a lot of experience of: content marketing, like what we're doing. I love our conversations. I don't always love having to sort of put together interviews
Mm,
with I enjoy the interviews, but I don't enjoy having to put that whole machine together, produce content constantly every week. And a lot of types of marketing, like Instagram marketing, Twitter, it's here today and it's gone tomorrow, versus
oh,
other forms
yeah.
of marketing where you create digital assets and then you run them on an automatic basis. So those are different forms of kind of activity trap, if you like, that I've seen
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, yeah. I hadn't thought of that at all, but you're totally right. Any kind of content marketing. I mean, we're in a podcast trap.
Yeah,
People
we are.
expect us to do a podcast. So that's content marketing traps. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're right. They do, to a lesser degree, they're traps. I would, in rank order, say that those are more easily to just quit. If you
Agreed.
stop tweeting on Twitter and your Twitter followers are bummed out, you're like, so what? But there's rank order to these, but they're all valid and they're things to consider. Yeah.
I mean, I would say if your Twitter followers are bummed out, that's one thing. But if it's a driver of your business traffic, then that's something you can't so easily just take the foot off the gas of. And that's where I would say, if you're big on Instagram and Pinterest posting, for example, and that requires a lot of manual work, then that would be an example of where that's harder to get out of, really.
Totally.
So tell me about some concrete, let's get personal about this, and concrete example from your business of something that felt like a ladder trap, Jason.
Okay. All right. Full confessional
It's
time here.
professional time. Here we go.
I have two examples that come to my mind. One is positive, one is negative, I guess you could say. Um, but both felt like traps to us. We recently made a decision to basically sign a contract that was a 2-year term contract that was basically $36,000 a year. So whatever, 78 grand over 2 years. And it was a contract. And after we did that, we were like, I wonder if this was really a wise idea because that's a lot of money to come right out of the net profit of our business. And when we debated back and forth, we realized it was a real bear trap or ladder trap. We were into it. We signed. We made a commitment to a strategy and process, and there was no going back on it without legal consequence. And so then we were stuck in, and we were like, okay, now we have to kind of go down this path. Um, and so that was one example that was just recent. And as I think about this, I'm like, yeah, that's a good example. The other one in our business is we had a physical product line that we did for years. It was for 3 years in particular. That was a six-figure product line to us, and there were a lot of negatives to it, just a lot of kind of hassles and dramas, and the profit wasn't there. It was revenue but not profit so much. And so after 3 years of commitment to a specific product, we had the hard choice to make. Do we want to continue this? And because we had multiple streams of income in our business, we were able to say we're done with this in the way we were doing it. And so then we shuttered it, and we learned our lessons, and we've reimagined how to do it differently. And we had real takeaways that we said to ourselves, okay, we could have learned or did learn through the school of hard knocks. But that was not a a fatal business decision. Neither of these examples in my uh stories here were fatal, but they're painful. And so I think that's the question as it relates to these ladder traps is, some of these can be terminal. You start down some of these paths and you're done if because you can't they're not retractable or you know fixable. And so I think that's the thing to think through with in our businesses. And so anyway, those are a couple examples. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think the retractable or fixable piece is actually something worth deep diving into a bit.
Hmm.
But I should
Hmm.
first honor you with that return of some, airing some dirty washing. I would say a couple of classic traps that I've been in. I would say I'm in now. One is in the private label business products. I think that whole business model was not right for me on my own. Let's put it that way, because a
Mm.
lot of it
Hmm.
had implications of product development. The first thing is I did pure private label, which wasn't even back in 2014 very defensible. So as a business model, I should have either gone further and gone for custom products,
Yeah.
or just done something simpler like wholesale
Hmm.
arrangements. Which, given my business to business discussion skills, if I'd known about that model, would have probably suited me better.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot of skills which have stood me in good stead in terms of teaching others who've done a lot better with those than I have and are more comfortable with those, like importing from China. But it was a business model that demanded a fundamental orientation that I don't have towards product development. I'm just not that passionate about it. But the solution now is that I'm developing more sort of loose partnerships with people who are very passionate about that. The other one is podcasting, content marketing as the lead source for the Amazing FBA sort of side of things, the coaching and consulting. And my solution is that I'm just trying to, wean myself off creating things, in the daily and weekly view, and
Hmm.
trying to create some
Hmm.
books and lead magnets and developing on funnels that allow the economics of paid advertising to work, really. So that's really the thing that I'm trying to move to, which
Yeah.
I guess brings me to the point of the question of how do we avoid ladder traps in the first place? Because
Hmm.
obviously you talked about them being pretty painful. No
Yeah.
need to go through that pain if we don't have to. So how do we go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the lessons here turn into almost cliches, and we don't want them to be cliches. But the old cliche that it comes to my mind is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And
Mhm.
so some of this thinking is just prior, not stepping on a ladder trap. Step one, don't step on a ladder trap. But that's easier said than done, and we all make these choices and then realize that they were mistakes or errors or challenges or problems. So I think there are a set of ideas that you can implement in your business to really mitigate the risk. I would say the first one is test small and commit small. And I'm a big fan of thinking things through ahead of time, as much as possible, to make sure that you're really implementing something that you're actually super excited about. And it's got to be one of those things where is it even rise to the level of a test in your business? And you've got to get better and better at the kind of discretion to say no to stuff. I think of Steve Jobs. He was at Apple. The Mac computer was his big baby. It was a big flop at first, and then he got fired. But when he came back, Apple was in the state of affairs that it had, I think, hundreds or even more products. And he famously walked into the conference room and drew a 4-quadrant grid on the board and said, this is our product strategy. And it was like, four machines. And so I think the test small, commit small thing is a real challenge, but you've got to have the mental discipline to say to yourself, I like this idea and I am entrepreneurial and I like every idea I have, but this doesn't rise to the occasion. So that's one. The second thing is never get involved in a land war in Asia. So just little joke from Princess Bride there, but some things are just notoriously bad business ideas. I would put on that category for me personally. I would put never get involved in a network marketing business or MLM business. So some of these choices are, you just have to think through for yourself what looks like a complete and total bad idea to you. But then, the other third tip, more practically, is whenever big money is on the line, seek real counsel from professionals and wise advice before you sign anything. And that's just I think of a sage advice piece. Do not sign on to something unless you've really got a multitude of counselors telling you, yeah, this seems to make sense. This is a good idea. And then my fifth tip would be, do not succumb to the marketer's time pressure or scarcity tactics in their marketing. If it's anything like a service or a deal or whatever, don't succumb to high pressure tactics, and really think through objectively, is this something I really need? And is it something I'm going to install in my business, for the long term? And so those are my 4 tips for, dealing with how to avoid. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really like these. I think test small, commit small is really wise. Um,
Mhm.
Related to that, some business models or product types lend themselves to that and some don't, which
Mhm.
says to me, if you don't know what you're doing yet, start with something that will enable you to test it on a small scale, which rules out a lot of stuff, which is really helpful. If you have too much choice,
Mhm.
then things that rule out most options are very helpful filters, contrary to what you might expect. Having lots of options is not better for choice making. It really
Mhm.
isn't. It feels
Mhm.
like it should be. So for me, that would rule out private label as a first choice in e-commerce, even though lots of people I know have done incredibly well in it, but mostly because they started with retail arbitrage, or latterly quite a few of my clients are going
Mhm.
from wholesale deals, like doing $1 million a year in wholesale, and then adding private label products. They have cash flow, they have expertise. So anything
Yeah.
that doesn't
Yeah.
allow a small start is something to be at least very mindful of.
Well, in
The
that
other,
situation,
yeah,
if I can just speak into that
please.
situation for a moment, then what they started with was a niche or industry that with a business model, they could start small, wholesale
Mm,
selling, maybe with
yeah.
a minimum MOQ or something like that. And then they learned the niche or industry. And then they added a higher risk sourcing strategy or business model to what they already had complementary going, which is very smart tactic. It's like incrementally stepping your way into a niche with product strategies that are, more complicated or harder to execute on, but you've got the background and expertise and hopefully a list of customers and all that kind of thing. So
Mm.
I think there's a lot of wisdom there. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's a good example of mitigating your risk going into, making sure the ladder is leaned up against the right tree and then stepping up the rungs of it.
Yeah, well, I guess that kind of implies part of the solution as well as the prevention thing, which is two sides of the same coin. Like, I mean, trying to avoid setting yourself up for failure in the first place, I guess, is what we're discussing. But also, you don't necessarily know going in, so don't make a massive commitment. And
Mhm.
talking of which, a related but not quite the same point, Seth Godin, I think, is a big fan of setting a specific amount of money and/or specific time frame, preferably both, after which you make a no-go decision. A go
Mhm.
or no go, or no go or
Mhm.
kill decision, but you set that up in advance, which is so smart because psychologically you're going to be sunk in the sunk cost fallacy by the time you get a year into something, if you're private labeling something, or if you created a business that takes a
Mhm.
lot of effort, like a Shopify store, and
Yeah.
you've got a lot of creativity gone into it, you've worked so hard to get your traffic.
Yeah.
You need to have some hard numbers where you've discussed that in advance, like, okay, where do we call this if it
Yeah.
isn't profitable or isn't making revenue or whatever it is by a certain point? Do you have a point where you cut it off? And
So
those are not easy decisions.
yeah, I totally agree. Sunk cost fallacy is a huge part of this. So you want to walk through a little bit of that because there's two pieces in my mind. One is the money that you've spent,
Hmm.
The other piece of it is your time is a
Yes.
sunk cost as well, and you have that around your head. It's like whatever. It's just the weight on your shoulders is how much time you've spent on some
Yeah.
strategy that you have to walk away from. So yeah, that's a
I,
huge
I
part of it.
think you're right. Let's talk about that then, since you're mentioning it. I think the third part of the sunk cost fallacy is really hard to get your head around, and your pride's going to want to tell you that it doesn't exist if you're a straight male, which is emotional sunk cost.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
hard to admit to yourself that what you've been doing for a year is just wrong. But it's hard to admit to yourself sometimes, for me anyway, maybe I'm just undeveloped, but it's hard to admit to yourself that it's hard to admit to yourself. You think like, oh, I'm a businessman, I'm a hunter-gatherer, alpha male, I am not driven by emotion. But of course, the truth is, of course I am. And I'm an artistic type, at least I can fall back on that and go, oh, well, of course I'm emotional. So I think that emotional sunk cost can sometimes be the worst.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
unwillingness to go, I was wrong, and I committed time and effort and made promises to my wife or family or whatever it is,
Right.
and you've got to go, okay, I was wrong, and you got to say to other
Hmm.
people, I'm sorry, I was wrong, but I'm going to
Yeah.
adjust and iterate and work towards fixing it.
Well, the motions that you're talking about are pride, ego.
Yes.
Also, you have to walk away from something. You have to admit that you were wrong. So there's a degree of humility there to say, I messed up, especially if you have a team around you. It's one thing if you're a kitchen table entrepreneur by yourself. It's another thing if you've got a team member or a larger team that you've rallied their enthusiasm in support of your idea. You've focused them and their energy and effort on an idea, and all of that is sunk cost. Then if you abandon the idea, and so that's a huge part of this because your status as a leader and all of those elements go into that whole emotional equation, which is it's a big real problem. I mean, it's a big reason why people don't step back off these ladders
Yeah.
and untangle themselves out of them. Yeah.
It reminds me of the Stockdale paradox, which is one of the Jim Collins things that he mentions in Good to Great, or one of his books, which I believe I've even got it written up here because on a board here, because I find it such a great go-to. He talks about the Stockdale paradox, which I believe Jim Stockdale was, and correct me if I'm wrong if you know different. He
Hmm.
was a prisoner of war in, I think,
Vietnam.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
There are multitudes of foreign wars that the Americans have you could choose, and he survived by being brutally honest with himself, but also having faith that he would find his way out of the situation. And I think that that mentality mix is really hard, but that is really 100% what an entrepreneur needs. Is you've got to have faith that you'll work your
Hmm.
way out of it,
Hmm.
but equally admit the truth.
Yeah.
And some of the great business leaders are very obsessed with the word truth, whatever that means. And Jeff
Hmm.
Bezos is, for example, one of those.
So he was a optimistic realist, not a delusional like pessimist. He was
Yeah.
being very honest about his circumstance, but also had the hope of the future. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think so, if that's my understanding. I mean, obviously, there are
Mhm.
probably very deep psychological studies
Mhm.
that may disagree, but as a general principle, I think that that works.
Yeah.
Talking of which, talking of stepping outside your own head, I think your idea of wise advice is really, really important. I mean,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
thing is, a lot of entrepreneurs seem to go veer between, I wanted to fire my boss, why would I ask anyone's opinion? And just following what the guru says. And
Mhm.
neither, I think, is right. You have to have your own intuition and instincts, and those will get better over time. You're going to learn from mistakes, and that's just
Mhm.
the best way to learn, but it's the most painful way to learn. However, it's really super smart to talk to lawyers, but particularly accountants and small business accountants, in my experience, who've been around the block for a few decades, have seen a lot of things come and go, and they will have seen patterns, and they can pass those patterns on to you. They're by their nature somewhat risk averse people. So they aren't always going to be the people whose advice you slavishly follow, but at least getting a sense of their view, I just think is
Yeah.
incredibly good plan. And few of us talk to our accountants enough, I think.
Well, the other part of that conversation, of course, is just the internal conversation with your team members. One of the smartest things any leader can do is just be completely honest about the situation you find yourself in with your team and own it. I mean, if chances are your team is more clear on the problems occurring in your business than you are. So, to the extent that you can just say, friends, we're stuck. We have a problem. This is a a big situation we're in, and I need to be honest about the decision making around it and get your opinion and just solicit the opinions of your team members. I mean, that can be massively valuable, and it's a step of humility, and it includes them in creating a new future. So I think there's huge wisdom in that. And so that whole piece of seeking counsel and advice doesn't have to be expensive or special. It can be your team, and their wisdom and insight might really unlock new ideas for you. And there's humility in there, and in terms of listening and understanding their points of view, and being a good partner in the work, with your team members. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. So another few ways that spring to mind to avoid ladder traps. I think you need to look the big picture stuff. I think the big picture is underrated as a thing that determines outcomes. I think everyone very naturally in the e-commerce space, particularly above all in the Amazon focus space, tends to be fed such a strong diet of it's all about the platform, it's all about the hacks, it's all about the tactics, that they really don't take strategic decisions seriously enough until they've been in business for a few years, by which time, as you said, you can be locked in. So I would say the business model you're running, if you don't even know what a business model is, or you're not sure what it is really worth taking the time to examine it from a 60,000-foot view and sort of do a diagram of it. Just rough out some form of flow chart. You don't have to be super scientific, bash it around, talk it through with wise people that have been in the space for several decades. I know you've got a mentor that you talk to. You mentor people. I help people that are new to e-commerce, and
Yeah.
just get a sense of how does this thing operate. And then if your comment says, but surely that means by year 3 you'd have to involve, $500,000 of working capital to reach my target. That
Hmm.
may be a true insight, in which case you may not choose to do that business model. So looking at it as a whole system, it's hard to do, but I think it's really important.
Yeah.
Second thing to avoid traps is think about physical versus digital products, and whether that's really, the cash flow characteristics, for example, of physical, something you really want to get into.
Hmm.
Products versus services, think about if you scaled this up, and we talked about scalability before, really important. Is this going to become a nightmare if this succeeds?
Hmm.
And then, how sustainable is my marketing as well? I've talked about content versus ad driven.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so those are ways to avoid ladder traps. What are your thoughts then? If we feel or discover, as many of us do, myself, I've certainly been in that situation, my clients as well. If you feel that your ladder is leaning against the wrong tree, how do we sort of unpick that and get it leaning on the right tree?
Yeah, I do think there are specific things that you can do if you feel like you're stuck into the wrong deal and wrong situation. I think the first one is read your contracts and relook at your deal structure. And sometimes that means going back and looking at prior literal contracts or the service level agreement of some, a vendor or something like that, some deal that you signed off on. Other times it's going back and looking at your emails and be like, wait, what was this original arrangement? And just take a set of fresh eyes approach to it and relook at it. I think the next thing would be to step back from that and then blue sky, a blue ocean strategy, the situation. Given the situation you're in, what are the options that exist? And I think there's valuable work that can be done there. Um, Frequently, that means maybe if you're in a ladder trap, you can't get off that ladder, but you can minimize it in your business. You can marginalize it in essence, and diminish its meaning or importance in your business strategically. A third thing you can do is, again, as we've already talked about, understand sunk cost fallacy and really put on the table or on a piece of paper the list of what things did I invest into this, and what does it look like to walk away from those things, but just be honest about it. The opposite side of sunk cost fallacy is opportunity cost. So the question, if you start from like day one is today, like Jeff Bezos's mantra, and you say to yourself, starting today, this is day one for my new future business. Um, then what is like the zero base approach to it? And zero base budgeting is an old phrase from whenever 90s or whatever, where you would literally every year you'd say your budget for anything in your business is zero. And then everybody would have to justify like, no, I really need the money for my Klaviyo account so we can do email marketing. Okay, you may have $250 a month. You zero base your whole entire business. That's day one thinking, and I think that's really really valuable. Um, and then I also think you probably need to um, I guess go meta, not in the Facebook use of meta, but go meta for a moment and ask yourself, why am I why did my behavior lead me to be in these situations? What was it about my decision making process and my framework that allowed me to be in this mess? And do I have a system in place where I proactively avoid and then manage problematic bear traps or ladder traps? And I think that's an important key, is to think through, um, what does my system look like for examining what we're doing? And maybe it's an annual planning day, maybe it's a quarterly examination of your profit and your expenses, maybe it's some other kind of special event that you do where you really examine these things. So anyway, so those are some things to consider and do if you're stuck into ladder traps right now. I don't know what your thought on those are, Michael.
Yeah, I like that. And one thing we talked about before we went on air is a very interesting. I'd like to pull your thoughts out about this. You were talking about how much you reflect on experience and whether you even recognize or admit to yourself. And we talked about the emotional difficulty, but sometimes it's a cognitive thing, like you don't realize you're in a trap. And so you
Hmm.
were talking about the different types. Is it hedonic and something else, the sort of relationship we have to
Oh,
reflection?
yeah, yeah.
Interesting topic. Tell us more about that.
Well, I should have probably Googled it up a little bit, but let me just describe for you what I was talking about, and then people can search around for it. So there's a psychological test that you can do, and it basically puts you into a three-part framework, and it's really interesting. And every one of us has this approach in terms of mental, framework that we bring to things. And there's three. The three buckets are. Past oriented. So in our mind, we're constantly reliving the past, thinking about what happened previously. So that's a mindset. The second one is they call hedonic, which is hedonism, but it specifically means being in the moment, thinking about this specific moment with all of your kind of mental energy. And that's a hedonic. And then the third one is future oriented, where you're a dreamer and you're just constantly dreaming up new things. And that three set thing, it might come out of is it oh gosh, Mindset by Dweck. Was her name Helen Dweck or something like that? I know you, but anyway,
Yeah.
it might be from that. It might be tied to that. But anyway, people
Yeah.
can search for that. But just search for the, and we might put it in the show notes. I'll find it. But the concept is important because what it
Mm.
does when you do this little test is it says, well, you're 30% past oriented and 70% future oriented and 0% hedonic. And so you need to practice being present in the moment, or focus on that piece. So that's the kind of intelligence it gives you. And if you run your business where you're constantly just in the moment or future oriented, like shiny objects, the future is going to be great, I'm going to do new things, and you never have that past orientation of reflection, contemplation, examination of prior results, if that's just not how you're wired in your DNA, then you're probably going to have a harder time with this ladder trap situation. Yeah.
Agreed. And by the way, thank you for explaining that because I had no idea what the official psychological terms are, but the concept is really, really clear. And I think
Hmm.
it's a very simple and very important, profound psychological thing. And it requires self knowledge. If you're just self aware
Hmm.
enough to know that you really don't like something, my suggestion is again the who, not how thing. That if you know that you're not good, for example, as I am at looking at current specific
Hmm.
realities in the financial sense, you have to hire a bookkeeper. I mean, that's what I've done
Hmm.
recently. And in fact, in the process of sort of thrashing around, maybe hiring a
Hmm.
different one because it's been hard to work with because I'm a nightmare to work with because I'm really not good at that. But you have to work that through. And my suggestion is really simple. If there's an area you're really weak on,
Hmm.
you have to get some help.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
ignore it because inability to reflect on the
Yeah.
past is going to condemn you to
Yeah.
repeat it into the future, which if it's not working is not a good plan. And so yeah, get an accountant in for books or a
Hmm.
marketing expert if your marketing's terrible, or a sourcing expert if your sourcing's terrible, etc.
I found the reference. It's a book called The Time Paradox by Philip Zimbardo. And
Yeah.
there's a test called the ZTPI test. And that's where this all comes from. So that's the book. And I encourage people to check it out. There's the online little test that you can do. I think it's free. I don't remember, but it was very interesting to go through.
Yeah,
I don't,
very, very, very
yeah.
good stuff. I like that a lot because
Yeah.
a lot of what strikes me is extremely simple and yet profound pattern that I see. People who want to start businesses and never do, who don't take enough action.
Hmm.
They think
Hmm.
too much. I'm
Yeah.
I'm prone to overanalysis. People who are big on taking action and actually get into creating a 6 or maybe early 7-figure business are very, very action and operations focused. But those guys tend to hit a wall at some point as well. They either have to sell the business or they're going to get to the next step. They really have to stand back and reflect, which I find the masterminds are where you see people blinking and going, oh my goodness, I haven't thought about this in this way before. And to try and persuade people not to just focus on operations is quite hard, but I think they generally hit a wall, and that's when they're open to thinking about it. So it is a real thing, the ability to reflect, but it is not a substitute for action. I think there's a rhythm, isn't there? You take action, you stand back and lick your wounds, or you celebrate, and then you go, right, how can we replicate that success? Or how can we never do that again? Like with your contract that you thought, wow, I don't want to do that again, you know?
Yep.
Couple of other thoughts about how to pivot things around. I think there's a really useful rule of thumb, which Jeff Bezos, I think, was very fond of: decision type 1 versus type 2. One is reversible or non-reversible decisions. I think you need to be much more mindful about irreversible decisions, or not totally irreversible, but not getting into a pickle in the first place. I guess this is more about prevention than cure, I suppose, but it's all related. You really should educate yourself. You should talk it through with your experts. You should talk it through with your team, business partner, life partner, if they're different people. But also to give you enough headspace to turn the ship around if it's needed, you should get out of the habit of over discussing reversible decisions, because you can micromanage those quite easily and get quite happy about the fact that you spent ages perfecting one particular infographic and your business model as a whole is broken. It's so easy to fall into that because it's kind of satisfying and safe, but not very effective.
I've never thought of it that way before, but you're totally right. I love that. That's Bezos, reversible or not reversible decisions. The similarity there to the Robert Ronstadt corridor principle is interesting. I guess it's like the corridor principle says, if you walk down a corridor, there are doors you see appear to you that you wouldn't have been able to see if you hadn't walked down that path. But I guess to extend his corridor principle, there are those doors you can walk through that are not reopenable from the other side, and there are doors that are openable. Again, you just get back out of the deal and you're like, no, never mind, I'm not doing that, I'm going to somewhere else. But this is very interesting to tie all these ideas together.
Yes, exactly. Some doors are in corridors and some aren't, I think. I mean, if you spend all of your life savings on some private label product, then it doesn't mean you can never start a business, but it's going to really slow that down. Whereas if you are mindful about just being humble about the fact you're probably going to get some decisions wrong, and you never spend all your money on something, or to your point, painful but not fatal was a very good phrase. If any outcome of a decision, the worst it can be is painful but not fatal, that's a good decision. Fatal for your business, let's not go too dark, but that's a very good basic principle, is that whatever decision you make should not have the potential to kill your business off if it doesn't work out. And very simple, but I mean, again, that's much more prevention than cure. I guess in terms of prevention, once you realize there's a very old phrase we have in Britain, which is, when you're in a hole, stop digging. So if you realize that something isn't working, we talked about this before, but being prepared to quit. I mean, the sunk cost fallacy is the fallacy. The medicine is quitting strategically, not quitting when it's getting hard, but that's just a natural dip, as Seth Godin calls it. So market adoption is a painfully long, slow process. Sometimes if you're doing your own marketing, getting responses to your social media marketing might take you a year, and at month 3 you might want to quit. But then having more rational quitting points and using those means you quit doing the part of your business, the product line, the partnership, the sourcing strategy, whatever it is that isn't working, which frees up time, money, and energy to do the other things that could work. That's the most important thing.
Totally agree. There's so many economic ideas or principles this ties into. We've talked in prior episodes about asymmetrical risk reward. And so I encourage people to go back and to listen to that episode. And the idea there is that there are some decisions that have small investment and massive potential in, positive result. And that whole idea of small decision, big future outcome can apply to ladder traps. There are some seemingly small decisions that you make that can be ladder traps as well, that have then these big long-term implications. And you say to yourself, man, I am so bummed we made that choice so long ago. So that applies to this as well, where there's literally like orders of magnitude size impact in your business that has consequence as it relates to the ladders as well. So
It's true, but the last thing I would say is related to that. A lot of this stuff is really hard to predict. You don't know what you don't know when you start something,
Mhm,
and also the ability to just run the operational basics of learning a course. It's a video course or a YouTube course, or you got a ton of Udemy courses, and
mhm,
they're very good as far as they go. But you have to start with the tactical day-to-day basics because you can't get your head around other things. But it's the ability
mhm,
to see a business model in the abstract is much harder, which I think is therefore it's rarer. It's harder to explain, it's harder to kind of put across, it's harder to monetize. But I'm really pleased that we do focus on that because I think at a certain point you see it more as a whole, and
mhm,
it's only when you see a business model as a whole or a business as a whole, 1 year's worth of financials, for example, that you can start to evaluate it. And
mhm,
so really you're going to have to allow for being wrong. And I think the solution, as we've talked about, we've got a whole section of the podcast about pivoting, which I haven't talked about for a while, but it's a really important concept because
mhm,
what it means is you can go in the wrong direction for a while, but still save your business by flipping aspects of it, keeping some aspects the same and some turning through 90 degrees or even more. So you can stay in the same industry, but
mhm.
source completely differently. So for example, you
Yeah.
might stay in the industry of dolls clothes, but instead of selling physical products on eBay, you sell digital patterns, as you and Cinnamon did. You could keep the same exact product line on Amazon, for example, or a Shopify store, and you've been sourcing it from China and you've had an utter nightmare. Maybe you start sourcing it from the UK, your profit margins change, but it's less of a sourcing nightmare.
Mhm,
You could stay on the same platform on Amazon, but flip between retail arbitrage. Maybe that's getting really hard to source. You move to wholesale for more consistency, or you move from pure RA to whatever that is to replens. There's lots of ways you can move. I mean, in my case, I can stay in the same industry, but change partnership model. So instead of me being, responsible for everything, I'm these days partnering right now. I've got a couple of joint ventures in process there. With people who are obsessive and expert product developers, which is my
mhm.
great. I don't have a great interest in that, but I love the marketing piece, and so that is a partnership that's those are the partnerships that are coming together. So
Yeah.
it's not really a violent change. It's leveraging my abilities, but it's getting rid of the stuff off my plate and bringing other people into account for my weaknesses, which is also a smart move generally as well.
Love it. Well, what a great conversation, man. This is such an interesting set of leadership questions and decisions, all the way from Stephen Covey to all the other books we've referenced. Do we mention the Derek Stevers book as well?
No,
That
Derek
was a
Sivers,
nice one
hell
too.
yeah or no
Sivers,
is
yeah,
is one we didn't reference actually, and forgive me saying the
yeah,
H word, but that
yeah.
is part of the title. So yeah, that's a really interesting book. I mean, I've got it right here on my shelf, and it's basically if you're not really totally enthusiastic about an idea, you should probably say no. Which,
Hmm.
having done a lot of the ones where I'm kind of lukewarm about it, I can say it's the crash test dummy for that. Yes,
Yeah,
it's a good plan to follow that.
yeah.
Um,
Well, let me wrap it up here for us and summarize and thank everybody for listening. So, if you're in a business decision that feels intractable, then you've stepped on a ladder trap. And hopefully, this episode has been helpful to give you strategies and ideas for getting yourself untangled from that ladder and repositioning it against the right wall so you can start climbing properly in the direction you want to go. So, appreciate everybody listening today. Michael, as always, it's a great conversation to have with you, and it's an honor to be able to do the podcast with you. Any final call to actions or comments?
yeah, I'd love if you could just summarize quickly what we've covered because we covered quite a few topics. It'd be nice to pull it together for people if that's possible.
Sure. If you are stuck in a ladder trap, maybe it's related to your founding team choice, your niche or industry, your product line, your financing strategies, or any long term contracts that you've participated in. And maybe even business model, product type, or physical product versus service, and on and on. Then you've got some hard choices to make. And so we'd encourage you to consider reading the contracts or agreements you've made, stepping back and seeking wise counsel, and understanding sunk cost fallacy and how it's playing with your mind. And if you're stuck on a ladder trap right now, then we'd really encourage you to figure out how to go forward and avoid them. Avoiding them can best be done by testing small and committing small. Never getting involved in a land war in Asia, which is a joke, of course, for Princess Bride fans, but you get the idea. Never commit to a big, crazy idea. And when big money is on the line, always seek counsel and advice. And finally, do not succumb to marketers' time pressure or scarcity tactics that are designed to get you to make hasty decisions. And so, with that, hopefully, it's a good summary of the topic of ladder traps. And there you have it.
Absolutely. By the way, the reason that the scarcity and fear and whatever for marketers works is an internal problem for us in the end. It's fear or greed, isn't it? And we need to manage those emotions in ourselves, is what I would say. So that, talking of wise counsel, obviously we if you think I'm wise, well, certainly I think you're wise, Jason. So if people want to come to you, I'm certainly got experience. I think wisdom wisdom is gradually coming with the gray hairs. So winning on Shopify and 10K Collective, the two places, tell us a little bit about what you offer for entrepreneurs in terms of wise counsel at the winning on Shopify sort of stable of services these days.
Sure. Yeah. Kyle and I do a couple different things in our business. We do one-on-one coaching and consulting with veteran e-commerce operators. We don't work with folks who are startups or brand new to it, but if you've got a effective product strategy and are growing your sales, then we have a one-on-one consulting that could be of interest. We have an application page on winningonshopify.com, and Kyle focuses on Amazon and Walmart channels. I focus on Shopify and branding and marketing strategies. And then we also have small group opportunity as well. So that's how you can find it, winningonshopify.com. We're rebranding, and so soon that'll redirect to our new brand. But until then, that's the place to find the details in the application for one-on-one coaching. Yep.
So if you want to come and find out more about me, I do also one-to-one stuff. I think the best thing we offer these days is the masterminds. We've got the 10K Collective masterminds, which really range from businesses anywhere from mid 6 figures to high 7 figures, I suppose in dollar terms, verging on 8 figures in the biggest cases. And I'm also starting a new group that I'm quite excited about, sort of in early days, for 6-figure operators, to get them from the sort of $10,000-$20,000 a month range up towards the next level. So if you're interested in that, I had somebody email me literally yesterday about it. So just email me, michael@amazingfba.com. Otherwise, you can find the mastermind at theamazonmastermind.com. Amazingly still up, even though that's blatantly infringing on IP, and I didn't say that publicly, but if not, you can find it at amazingfba.com. You'll find the stuff there. But for the moment, the Amazon Mastermind is still up, so do come and find us there. Jason, it's been a great discussion. I really think this is a topic where I see a lot of pain and not much discussion about how to solve it. So it's really good. Thank you for bringing that topic up. Really like it.
Yep. Okay, that's the show. Perfect. Awesome. Thanks everybody for listening live with us. As always, it's an honor to do these live. And so if you'd like to connect with us going forward, of course, you can just email us directly or leave comments underneath where you're watching this video if you're watching via replay. And we'll be sure to snag those. So as always, Michael, this is great, man. Good times.
Yeah, likewise. Good discussion.
All right, I'm going to end it here. Thanks, everybody.